I think we'll start, and hopefully, if Shiraz is here, he can join. So, first of all, thank you for staying a bit later on. I can see that some people have left, but thanks for the attendance. I'm going to give an introduction to myself, and then when I ask the first question to each of our panelists, I'm going to ask them, first of all, to just give a little bit of background on themselves, just for context. So the title, why are hedge funds flocking to the UAE? This is a question that I've been asked a lot over the last few years, and as we've seen the momentum grow, here's Shiraz. Sorry. Hi. So, yeah, this is a common question that I've been asked a lot over the last few years. My background, just before I kick off, is that I head the regional practice for Simmons & Simmons. So we're a very asset management focused firm. We have a very large hedge funds practice, and we've actually acted for most or the vast majority of the international hedge fund managers who have set up in the UAE, especially over the last 3 or 4 years. Really, we saw it starting really in 2019, just before the pandemic, and then we saw it accelerate. So I've spoken to a lot of our clients to ask them the same question. It'll be interesting to hear from the panel what their perspectives are. On the panel today, we've got 2 regulators. We also have 3 practitioners from various perspectives of the market. So what I'm going to do is kick off. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is kick off with Yasser to start with. So Yasser, as a regulator, it'd be good to understand what Securities and Commodities Authority has been doing in the space, in the asset management space more broadly. What are the kind of recent initiatives, upcoming potential developments that are relevant, you think, to the hedge funds sector?
Thanks, Mr. Munir, for the question. I'm Yasser Abdullah. I'm heading the investment fund as well as the AML-CFT within the Securities and Commodities Authority, the financial regulator of the mainland and the United Arab Emirates. So to come back to your question, Munir, maybe recently everyone following the investment and the asset management industry have seen the major changes in the investment fund legislation in the country. The aim of these changes was trying to focus and promote the investment management, local investment management industry here in the UAE. As well as developing the current ecosystem that we have in the country. By developing the ecosystem, we mean having more asset manager as well as having more service providers when it comes to custody service as well as administrators. Having service providers and stakeholders, of course, Mr. Munir, will increase the competitiveness in the market, as well it will ease the process of establishing new funds, especially for the small investment managers in the country. That's why we are trying to develop the ecosystem. We had a consultation with our stakeholders where we had some major changes in the investment management license. For instance, we reduced the capital for asset management license from 50 million to 1 million to harmonize more with the other jurisdictions and the financial regulators here in the country. We have also changed the legal structure. It was limited to a private joint stock company. Now any legal structure is approved. As well as 100% foreign ownership is approved now. You don't need any local or UAE national partner to practice your activity in the mainland UAE. We have also eased the process of accrediting employees to work in our licensed entities, and we combined some of the jobs to reduce the cost for the asset managers, as well as we have allowed the outsourcing for compliance and some of the activities. This is in terms of the changes that we have done to the asset management license and the related license. However, when it comes to the product, we have changed the investment fund regulation as well, where we have introduced new type of funds such as real estate development funds, ESG funds, and credit funds, where any private funds can start lending companies indirectly by buying their bonds. So these are the recent changes in the UAE and the funds landscape. We've also added something called protected sell funds, as well as family offices fund. And maybe if you saw the news, recently the Prime Minister Office has approved the pension scheme. And this has been done in coordination and in collaboration between the Securities and Commodities Authority and the Ministry of Human Resources, where asset managers licensed by the SCA will be able to manage pension schemes for the citizens here in the UAE.
Thank you very much. And Yasser, I'll come back to you. You mentioned some interaction with other regulators as well in the UAE. So I'll come back to you to talk about passporting regime and some other examples of cross-regulator collaboration. I'd like to now turn to Miriam. Miriam, you're a senior regulator responsible for supervision of hedge fund managers in the ADGM. Please, could you just give us a little bit of your background, because I know you've worked in the EU previously as well, and let us know a little bit about ADGM's regulatory approach, or rather the FSRA's regulatory approach in this area.
Hi, thank you. Marianne Shikluna, as you've just explained, I'm responsible for supervision in FSRA within ADGM. I've been in regulation for over 28 years. I come mainly with a European background. And I was actively involved, and I used to sit on the ESMA board, EIOPA, and EBA boards, and also was actively involved with the European Central Bank. So I had a quite wide interaction with a number of regulators in the EU. Our regulatory approach as FSRA in the area of asset management, but particularly for hedge fund managers, we adopt a risk-based approach, and with the aim and the objective of reaching a balance between flexibility, practicality, and proportionality, and balancing that with the upholding and maintenance of international regulatory standards, because for us that is very important to add the credibility to the center. However, how does this risk-based approach translate into practice? My fellow regulator here has mentioned some of the aspects that ESCA is working on, which are also prevalent in the FSRA framework. Such as reduced regulatory capital requirements for hedge fund managers. We have created fund setups that are more conducive for hedge funds. For example, we have the exempt funds and the qualified investor funds, which are not subject to any investment restrictions, so they're very suitable for various hedge fund strategies. They're not subject to any maximum investments, but just a minimum investment restrictions to ensure that only certain types of investors, professional, sophisticated, and market counterparties investors can access these setups. And also, for example, the fund managers are not subject to any remuneration restrictions. We also adopt a risk-based approach throughout the authorization process, because we're quite conscious of the time to market. So a risk-based approach is adopted to ensure that the authorization process, again, is as thorough as needed, but as streamlined to be as efficient as possible. And that risk-based approach is also adopted and followed through the ongoing supervision, which is mainly focused more on the fund manager rather than the products. Again, we don't operate in a vacuum, so as a FSRA, we engage actively with other regulators, both local regulators, including ESMA, ESCA, and also regional and international regulators. But we also engage a lot with the industry. And in fact, we have regular meetings with the Investment Management Association. There's more, but I'll stop here in the interest of time.
Okay, thank you. No, that's very interesting. And I think there are various factors that have led to the large influx of hedge fund managers into the UAE. I think legal and regulatory factors obviously are very highly relevant to them, but there have been other factors at play. So I often refer to them as the softer factors. So what I wanted to do was now talk to the other panelists on what these other factors were. Feel free to mention your perspective of the legal and regulatory regime as well. But I'm very interested to hear about the softer factors, such as around talent acquisition and retention, what pull and push factors. So sometimes it's not necessarily what's happening here, but what's happening elsewhere that is leading to this influx. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn to Berkay, first of all. So if you could just say a few words about your background and then talk about, you recently moved to the UAE. Why did you move here? So if you could just say a few words on that as well.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. My name is Berkay Öncel. I work for Esalowi. We are a credit-based investment firm managing around $1.5 billion in AUM. About half of that is in the hedge fund strategy, the other half in the private credit. From our perspective, we've been investing in the region for over a decade now in the Middle East in the secondary credit and liquid credit. And we've been doing it on a fly-in, fly-out basis, coming in from London or Hong Kong, depending on which office was looking at it. What we've seen, I think, over the last few years is both in UAE and the broader region, we've seen an increased sophistication in our markets, where we are seeing more and more opportunities to come in play. And we've seen the example, for example, in ADGM, we had the restructuring of NMC Healthcare, which was a very complicated case, but very successful done in the jurisdiction, which gave us quite a bit of encouragement that the opportunity set is growing, and we felt like it was the right time to actually put boots on the ground and become more proactive. I was previously based in London up until a couple of months ago, and to be honest, comparing, the tax situation, the weather situation, the lifestyle, difficulties of raising a family in London, it became almost, no-brainer given the business reasons and the lifestyle reasons to set up on presence in UAE and in this instance in ADGM for us was a finalized process. I do think that this is nothing unique to us. Obviously, we are based in credit markets, so that's more relevant. But we are seeing increased sophistication across many different segments of the financial world, and it's only going to accelerate, I think. So we should see more and more investment firms not only coming here for lifestyle reasons, which are quite important, obviously. If you can do your job anywhere in the world, why not be here where there's a good time zone, good tax jurisdiction, and good lifestyle in general? But also the investment opportunity set in the region are growing quite rapidly as well. And I think that's going to attract quite a bit of asset managers and hedge funds to come here to put presence on the ground and look at these opportunities in UAE and also the broader region, and obviously using Abu Dhabi and Dubai as hubs for those investments, for those opportunities.
Thank you for that, Berkay. So I'd like to turn to Shiraz now. Shiraz, you've been here a long time, relatively speaking. And one of the things I've been asked, and I'd like to hear your perspective on this, is what's different this time? Because, we've had a legal regime and a regulatory regime. We've had the DIFC, we've had the ADGM. ESCA's been making changes to and reforming its legal and regulatory regime. We've had a low tax environment for many years. What's changed? What has changed from your perspective? What are some of the push and pull factors for hedge fund managers coming to the UAE?
Thank you, Munir. Just for context, so I've been in the industry it'll actually be 30 years this month. Started off at JP Morgan in London, spent some time in New York, worked in the hedge fund industry, and then came over to the UAE 11 years ago. I would say in answer to your question, probably credibility has changed. So some of the factors that we've pointed out in terms of pull factors, low taxation has always been around. Innovation, I'd say the UAE particularly now has become very innovative. People may have varied views on cryptocurrency, but it's become probably the global leader with regards to that. I was reading an economic statistic the other day saying that in terms of crypto ownership, 28% is now in the UAE. That's the number one in the world. With regards to intellectual capital, not only do we have banks and law firms and asset managers, we have sovereign wealth funds that are allocating capital right now. All of this is now bringing in the intellectual capital that you require to manage money. As we've said before, we've been competing with other global hubs, but I think the UAE is now standing on its own 2 feet as opposed to just being somewhere that was probably an outlier when I first came. There's a certain irony in the fact that when I looked at the list today and where people are attending from, there are people here from hedge funds now that wouldn't actually recognize the UAE in many ways, shapes or form a decade ago. When I first came to the region and I was trying to put in paperwork to deal with some of those companies, it was like, we're not so sure. We're now nearly, where did we start? The DFSA was 2004, so we're 19 years down the road. We have ESCA, we have FSRA. We're a lot more robust now as a financial center. And again, some of those softer factors in terms of tourism, Emirates as an airlines, visa accessibility, the fact that we're associated right now with the largest shopping mall in the world makes this destination appealing to many people, not just from a regulatory framework perspective. So I think all of those factors put together, Munir, just give the region itself a lot more credibility as somewhere to operate from, both from a financial aspect, but also from a personal aspect. I've got 3 children. They're going through the education system here. My eldest is now studying in the UK. One of the concerns we had when we came a decade ago was, would we then fall behind the more established institutions elsewhere in the world? That is certainly no longer the case. The brightest students from here go on to study at the brightest institutions elsewhere in the world.
Thanks for that, Shiraz. And I think based on my discussions with clients, you cannot discount the human factors. It's not all about business and making money. It's also about being able to enjoy that money as well. And obviously, there are lots of issues around the world. There are lots of push factors, lots of turbulence. COVID cannot be underestimated how much of an impact that had, because it de-linked often where people work and where they can work from and where they can do business, quote unquote. With that in mind, I'd like to turn to Nigel now. So Nigel, if you can say a few words about yourself, but also I'd be very interested to hear your views on the question. So, what your response would be to why hedge funds are flocking to the UAE. But also, I know you have international experience in markets like Singapore. I'd be interested to hear some sort of comparative thoughts as well from you on your experience there and here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nigel from CGS CIMB Securities. CGS being China Galaxy Securities, which is China's second largest brokerage, and CIMB being Malaysia's second largest bank. And I work in the investment services pillar, which covers prime services and wealth management. To the question of why are hedge funds flocking to the UAE, certainly it'd be harder to find a more pro-business area than the UAE, and particularly Dubai, anywhere in the world. And if you go to the D33 statement, where they have stated that by 2033 they intend to be a top 4 financial centre, it sort of speaks for the ambitions and the drive that is behind everything that we're seeing going on. For the hedge funds, being in UAE and DIFC and regions like that, you're in the region of sovereign wealth funds, high net worths, family offices. So you've got a lot of allocators and some of the biggest allocators in the world at hand. There's investment projects that they can participate in. Other factors, they have 193 DTAs in place which is about 120 more than, say, a place like Singapore. The DFSA has put in place a crypto token regime. They've got a hedge fund code of practice. So all of these things sort of lead and combine to make it an interesting spot to come. The regulators are open to discussion and to change things to make business easier and attract the people. From the perspective of a comparison with Singapore, they both are going down a very similar path in terms of building out their financial centres, followed by attracting tourism, having events like the Grand Prix, the Dubai Sevens that's coming up, events like that, and also making a drive towards a technology centre. So once again, there's a very similar path that they seem to be following, and it's been successful for Singapore. I'd say that in the UAE sense, that they're doing it on steroids at a very quick pace, and they're catching up very quickly to any other financial centre that may be a competitor. So all of those things, Singapore has a VCC structure, whereas they got the CIF locally, very similar structures. Singapore may have slight advantages in terms of you only need one director as opposed to two locally. You can use a custodian that is independent as well as related in Singapore, whereas here it has to be independent. But they're very minor differences, and they're the type of differences that the regulators here would close very quickly when they want to. So, yeah, there's also the geopolitical reasons that are going on globally of being here. One of the ones being China and Hong Kong, which has driven a fair amount of business out of Hong Kong, and Singapore and Dubai have both been good recipients of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I will come back to you on some of the lessons maybe the UAE can learn from Singapore, or has already learned from Singapore, but we'll come back to that. I'd like to go back to Yasser now, and you mentioned collaboration between the regulators. So it's no secret that the UAE, in its drive to attract business, has also become more complex as a jurisdiction. So we have a plethora of free zones, commercial free zones. We also have 2 financial free zones, and we have 5 financial services regulators, if you include VARA and the UAE Central Bank, which is quite a lot for relatively small country in terms of population, but fast growing, obviously. What would be really interesting to understand is your experience of the collaboration between the regulators, and maybe if you could touch upon the passporting regime the fund passporting regime as an example of that.
Yeah, one of the main initiatives that we're working on recently, we currently are streamlining our process for approving funds. Now in ASCA we are approving funds in 5 working days only. This is a kind of competition, if you can say, between the jurisdictions within the country, where everyone is offering tax exemptions and trying to harmonize the regulation, but at the same time providing some incentives for the investors. Of course, we are always collaborating with the financial free zones, and we have MOU with the CBUAE, and we hope to have an MOU soon with VARA. When it comes to the FSRA and the DFSA, we've constantly communicating with them and cooperating and collaborating. And one of the results of our cooperation and collaboration was the passporting regime, where a fund established in one of the free zones, like the FSRA or the DFSA, if the fund is domiciled in one of these free zones, they can use their infrastructure and they can just start their activity in the mainland without the need to open new offices, hire new employees, which reduce the cost, where these asset managers can target a bigger audience in the mainland with a minimum cost. The process is that one of the financial free zone will only notify ASCA that the asset manager want to practice his activity in the mainland, and that's it. And we hope this is this would be a milestone for a bigger project that we are currently working on, which is the GCC passporting, which we hope to finalize soon and to be in effect by beginning of next year.
Okay, that's really helpful because one of the advantages of the UAE is its kind of regional hub status as the most developed financial jurisdiction in the GCC from a legal and regulatory perspective, but also one of the frustrations amongst asset managers in particular is that there is no overarching framework, regulatory framework, unlike other regions like the EU. So I think it's really good to hear about the progress on that GCC passport. Marianne, I'd like to come back to you. I'd like to ask you, what are the ADGM's linkages to Abu Dhabi's economic strategy? I know you share a common chairman between ADGM and the economic department in Abu Dhabi, but can you tell us a little bit more about the alignment and in terms of the regulatory strategy?
Yes, that is a very critical aspect of our operations. ADGM is more and more being plugged into the economic strategy of Abu Dhabi, and there are many aspects of those. One example is what you've just mentioned, that our chairman is also the chairman of the Department of Economic Development, and this provides ample opportunities to reduce, for example, certain complexities and achieve more efficiency and streamlining regarding the ease of doing business in Abu Dhabi. Another aspect is that our regulatory framework, we pride ourselves in being innovative and progressive as a financial regulator and ADGM as a jurisdiction. And we have developed our regulatory framework in this sector over time since ADGM was established, and many examples that I can mention, like the VC manager framework, a number of products for different sector-specific products in the fund space. Even this year, we've launched a number of private credit funds and even now recently sustainable funds, green funds and climate transition funds. And these are all reflective also of the strategic objectives of the Abu Dhabi economy. The focus is very much to increase the wealth, the asset and wealth management sector in Abu Dhabi, and also sustainability is a key focus given the net zero target of UAE. So even our regulatory initiatives are very much aligned with those strategic objectives. And one last important but very, very critical aspect is that we liaise very closely also with the sovereign wealth funds. And ADGM is the sort of international vehicle where the sovereign wealth funds and Abu Dhabi has the three of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world. And even if you look at statistics, there were 4 trillion of assets allocated in the region, 60% of which came from Abu Dhabi. And ADGM provides that international dimension for access to this capital. So even apart from the regulatory regime, ADGM also has an aspect of a strategic focus also of developing the ecosystem and provided that support to firms that establish in ADGM to ensure the continued growth and sustainability of the whole jurisdiction.
Thank you very much for that. I can see that our time's up, but if I may, one more question. Is that okay? Just one final question. So you mentioned the capital, the access to sovereign wealth. I think the UAE has one of the largest or most exciting, maybe, and accessible pools of capital, both at the sovereign and private level in the world at the moment. And that's only growing because of troubles elsewhere. I'd like to just give the final question to you, Shiraz. So based on your experience, you've been here a long time, and touching upon access to capital as well, but also access to intellectual capital. What would you say have been the key reasons why so much intellectual firepower, the portfolio managers, the relationship managers, the investor relations people that have come over, and also very senior investment personnel, C-suite individuals and founders, why have they all come to the UAE so quickly in such a short space of time? What's the crux?
I mean, I think we touched upon some of the pull factors earlier on, the softer factors about life over here in general. Having spent time in New York and London, I guess one of the things we need to be more aware of is some of the push factors from those regions as well. So if you look at taxation, we always look at from this angle. We live in a low tax regime. Europe has become an increasingly high tax regime. There has also been big geopolitical instability in Europe. I mean, there is a certain irony right now in that we sit in a part of the world that when I grew up was historically known as being a war zone or quite politically unstable. If we look right now, the war that's going on right now is actually in Europe. If you include, Russia, Ukraine under that sort of domain. You then look at other factors in terms of what I would say is we've become a lot more insular in many of those countries post-COVID with the advent of Brexit, etc. All of those factors have pushed a lot of that intellectual capital into this region. What we've also done very well in this region is we've moved very quickly to embrace that. Right, we've moved very nimbly with regards to laws and not just regulatory-wise, but also, like I said, in terms of accommodating people from around the world very quickly. I know we've gone through a huge property boom. People are always looking at property prices right now, but there is a huge spectrum across the property range in terms of where people can locate. I was reading today, the number of homes sold here over $10 million is like 200 homes sold over $10 million in the last 7 months. People just look at it as being a playground for the rich, but aside from that, there is a huge influx of people from the East and the support network that needed to facilitate that as well. Cheap labor is also available. I mean, there's a different ethical issue that I won't go into right now, but it does support the framework for allowing an economy to grow very quickly.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to wrap up now. Time's up. I think one point that I wanted to pick up on there was that one of the things I've seen that's changed a lot is it's not just senior people or people towards the end of their careers who are coming here. We're seeing a lot of juniors, a lot of analysts, people who are just at the start of their careers. We're seeing it within our firm as well. So people who would have normally spent 5, 6, 7, 8 years working in a more developed regulatory environment are moving almost immediately upon qualification. There's something that's changed. I think COVID had a lot to do with triggering or accelerating some of those changes in mindset, and also busting some of those myths about strength of infrastructure in developed economies, their ability to deal with crises, those types of issues. So I'm going to wrap up there. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. Please, can you give them a round of applause?